You are certain of this, Commander?
I am.
What is your name?
My name is General Elias.
No, your true name.
Are you certain you can do this?
With my life, sir.
Mira lived in a quiet corner of the valley where mountains rose like giant walls and forests spread like a green sea. The town was small and the people were simple. They worked in the fields, traded in the market, and told old stories near the fire at night. For most of them, life moved slowly and nothing seemed to change. Yet Mira carried a secret that made her world very different from theirs. She was not like the other children who grew into farmers or traders. She was the daughter of a pilot who once flew when the skies were full of war. Her father Aaron had been known as a skilled flyer, brave and steady. But when the fighting ended, he came back broken and quiet. He built a life of silence in the valley, far from the noise of the outside world. Mira was small when he passed away, yet she remembered his words and the way his eyes looked at the sky as if it held both pain and hope. The airfield near the town stood in ruins, weeds breaking through the cracks, old towers leaning with rust, and broken wires swinging in the wind. To the people it was nothing but a dead place, a place they passed by without care. But for Mira it was different. She knew what lay beneath the ground, a shelter built for the pilots of old hidden tunnels, and chambers filled with machines that once ruled the air. It was the secret her father had left for her, the secret she was told never to reveal. Mira kept her life quiet. She fetched water from the stream, she tended the goats, she sold herbs in the market. Her hair was always tied back and her clothes simple. She moved like someone who wanted no notice, and the people barely spoke of her except to say she was kind but distant. She let them think she was only a farmer's daughter because if anyone guessed the truth, her father's legacy would be in danger. Every evening when the sun fell behind the hills, Mira walked to the edge of the airfield. She would sit on a broken stone wall and listen to the silence. Sometimes she closed her eyes and she could hear engines in the distance. She could almost see shadows of planes moving through the clouds. And in her dreams she often found herself inside a cockpit, hands on the controls, heart racing with the thrill of flight. But she always woke before the sky opened fully, and in the morning she told herself that she was not meant to fly. Her father's words came back to her often, spoken one night when he had coughed hard and his voice was weak. He had held her hand and whispered, "One day you may need to fly when all else has fallen. Keep the secret until the world itself comes to seek it." She had nodded, though she had not understood. She was still young, but now those words lingered heavier. With each year that passed, life in the valley was peaceful. But beneath the surface there was fear. People spoke quietly about armies that marched in the east, about generals who rose to power and demanded loyalty, about towns that bent their heads or were burned to the ground. Mira listened but said little. She wanted the valley to remain forgotten, far from the eyes of any commander. Yet deep inside she knew that peace built on silence never lasted. One morning as Mira worked in the field, she noticed the birds had fled the forest. The air grew heavy and the ground trembled faintly. She stopped and raised her eyes to the horizon. Smoke drifted like a gray river and the sound of marching feet rolled like thunder. The villagers gathered quickly, faces pale with fear. They had never seen soldiers in such numbers. Their small valley had always been ignored, but now the army was coming straight toward them. By evening the soldiers filled the square, dark uniforms shining, weapons at their sides. The villagers stood in silence as the commander stepped forward. He was tall with a sharp face, eyes cold as stone, and his name was General Aaron. He looked at the people not as humans but as pieces on a board. He spoke with a voice that cut through the air. He did not waste words. Only one command fell from his lips: "Get me the last pilot standing." The villagers looked at each other confused and frightened. None of them were pilots. None of them knew why the general spoke of such a thing. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who was the last pilot? What did he mean? And why had he come to their forgotten valley? But Mira understood at once. Her blood froze as the words struck her like a blade. He was looking for her father's line, for the secret hidden beneath the airfield. And if the general found it, the valley would no longer survive. Mira kept her head down. She pulled her cloak tighter and slipped back from the square. She knew the soldiers would search house to house. They would ask questions. They would find the ruins of the field and dig deeper. If she stayed silent, the secret might be destroyed forever. But if she revealed herself, the danger would rise to its full storm. That night she returned to the edge of the airfield. The moon was bright and the ruins cast long shadows. She moved across the broken stones and down to the hidden entrance her father had shown her, pressing her palm to the old lock. The door groaned open and she stepped into the silence below. The air smelled of oil and rust. Dust clung to the walls. Yet the machines still stood in line like sleeping giants, waiting, breathing softly in their slumber. Mira walked between them, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She remembered sitting on her father's lap in this very place, listening as he spoke of the sky, of courage, of loss. She had not thought those stories would ever matter again, but now with soldiers in the town and the general calling for the last pilot, she felt the weight of destiny pressing upon her. She reached the craft her father once flew, its wings folded, its body scarred yet still strong. She placed her hand on the side and felt a strange warmth as if the machine recognized her touch. Her chest tightened. She whispered softly that she was not ready, that she was supposed to stay hidden. But the silence of the chamber answered back with only the hum of sleeping engines above. The soldiers spread through the streets, torches lit, boots echoing, villagers obeying with fear in their eyes. The general waited in the square, his patience thin, his gaze fixed on the dark shape of the airfield. He knew what lay beneath. He had hunted the last pilots for years. He believed one still remained, and he would not leave without finding the one who carried that bloodline. Mira sat inside the shelter, staring at the cockpit, her heart torn between silence and action. Her father's words rang again, "One day you may need to fly when all else has fallen." She felt her breath grow unsteady. Her world was no longer the quiet valley she once knew. It was now a storm, and she was at the center of it. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against the cold metal. The sound of marching above grew louder, closer. The general's shadow stretched long across the square, and in that moment Mira realized that hiding forever was no longer possible. The time she had been running from had come, and with it the choice that would change not only her life but the fate of the valley. The night carried the weight of silence and fear, yet within the hidden chamber a spark began to stir, a spark that would one day light the skies again. The valley that once carried peace now lived under the shadow of marching boots. The villagers who had spent their days in quiet work now found their streets filled with armed men. Every door was watched, every step was measured. Fear spread like smoke, and the name of General Aaron was spoken only in whispers. The general had made his demand clear. He wanted the last pilot standing, yet the villagers knew of none. They shook their heads when soldiers questioned them. They opened their homes to be searched. They trembled as the general's men overturned tables and threw belongings aside. But no one could give the answer he sought, for the only one who carried the legacy of a pilot was Mira. And she had hidden herself away. Mira watched from the shadows, moving carefully through paths the soldiers did not know. She saw how the general ruled with silence and fear, how he stood in the square each morning as if the valley belonged to him. He asked again and again where the last pilot was, and the villagers could only plead that no such person lived among them. But Mira knew it was only a matter of time before their denials would no longer hold weight. She returned often to the shelter beneath the airfield, sitting among the sleeping machines. Her hand resting on the wings of her father's craft, she thought of his words. She thought of the promise she had made to stay hidden. Yet she also thought of the villagers who now suffered because of the general's search. Her heart ached as she saw old men beaten for refusing to answer questions, children crying as soldiers frightened them, women standing helpless as food was taken from their tables. Mira had kept her secret for years, but now the cost of silence was no longer hers alone to bear. At night she lay awake in her small hut, staring at the roof, listening to the sound of soldiers outside, her mind torn between fear and duty. She whispered to herself that she was not ready, that she was not her father, that she was not meant to fly, but the truth pressed harder each day. She could feel it rising inside her like a fire. She knew the general would not stop until he either destroyed the valley or found what he sought, and if she did nothing, the valley would fall. One morning, the general gathered the villagers in the square, his voice carried across the crowd like iron. He said the valley had lied to him. He said he would burn their homes one by one unless the last pilot revealed themselves. The people wept. Some shouted that they knew nothing. Some fell to their knees begging, but the general's eyes remained cold. He raised his hand and ordered his men to set fire to the first house. Mira's heart pounded as she watched from the edge of the crowd. Flames licked at the walls of the home, smoke curling into the sky, the family within screaming as they were dragged out. The heat burned her skin even from a distance. She clenched her fists and felt tears sting her eyes. She could no longer remain silent. The valley was paying for her bloodline, and the choice she feared was now before her. That night she returned again to the shelter. She stood before her father's craft, her hands trembling. She whispered that she was afraid, that she had no teacher, that she could not carry such a burden. Yet as she spoke, she remembered the way her father had placed her hands on the controls when she was small, the way he had shown her how to pull the levers, how to listen to the hum of the engine. He had not trained her fully, but he had given her enough to keep the memory alive. She realized he had always known this day would come. Slowly, Mira climbed into the cockpit. The seat felt cold and heavy, the controls strange yet familiar. Her breath came fast, but her heart began to steady. She pressed the ignition and the chamber shook with the roar of an engine awakening after years of silence. Dust fell from the ceiling. The sound thundered through the tunnels. It was as if the sleeping giants had opened their eyes. Mira felt power flow through her veins as the craft came alive. Lights flickered across the panel. Gears clicked. Wings stretched open. She gripped the controls and closed her eyes, whispering a prayer to her father. Then she released the brakes and the craft rolled forward slowly. The hidden passage opened, and the night sky waited like a vast sea above her. The first flight was unsteady. The machine groaned and tilted. Mira's hands shook as she pulled the lever. The craft lifted off the ground. Rising into the air, her stomach twisted with fear, but her father's voice in memory guided her, telling her to trust the wings, to trust herself. The wind rushed against her face, the valley spread below her, and for the first time in her life she was flying. Not in a dream, but in truth. Above the valley, the general's soldiers looked upward in shock. Torches flickered as they pointed to the sky. Cries spread across the camp. The general himself stepped into the square and raised his gaze, his sharp eyes narrowing. The roar of the engine echoed through the night, and he knew at once that he had found what he sought. The last pilot had revealed themselves. Mira circled above, heart racing, fear clawing at her chest, yet also a strange strength building within her. She could see the soldiers scatter, some firing into the sky, bullets streaking past her wings. She swerved clumsily, nearly stalling, but regained balance. Sweat ran down her face. Her body shook, yet she held steady. She was no longer the hidden girl of the valley. She was the daughter of a pilot, and the sky was hers to claim. She did not fire upon them. She did not bring death. She only showed them that the spirit of the old pilot still lived. She soared once across the valley and then vanished into the clouds, leaving the general staring at the heavens, his jaw set, his heart burning with both fury and fascination. He muttered that he would not rest until he brought her down. The last pilot standing would be his. Mira returned to the hidden shelter before dawn. Landing rough and nearly crashing, the craft groaned as it settled, her hands stiff, her legs weak, yet her heart alive. She climbed out and collapsed against the wing, breathless, trembling, but filled with a fire she had never known. She whispered to her father that she had flown, that she had answered the call, that she was no longer afraid. The valley woke to rumors of the sight. Villagers spoke in awe, some in fear, that a plane had risen again, that the spirit of the old skies had returned. Some believed it was a ghost. Some said it was a sign of hope. The general's men searched harder, but none knew the truth. Only Mira carried the burden of that secret. Only she knew that the hidden shelter still lived, and that her father's craft had not yet fallen. Yet Mira also knew this was only the beginning, for the general had seen her flight. He would not stop until he caught her, and the valley would remain under his shadow. The valley carried a strange silence after Mira's flight. The villagers whispered in awe. Some said it was a spirit of the skies returning. Some said it was a dream brought to life. Some feared it would bring more destruction. Yet all knew the general had seen it with his own eyes, and nothing in the valley would ever be the same again. General Aaron stood in the square long after the craft had vanished into the clouds, his hands behind his back, his gaze sharp and steady. He said nothing to the villagers, but his silence carried more weight than words. The soldiers around him waited for orders, tense and uncertain, and finally the general spoke, his voice cold as steel. "Find her, the last pilot is here. She cannot run forever." From that night onward, the valley became a cage. Soldiers patrolled every road. Torches burned through the night. No villager could move without eyes upon them. The general ordered the airfield to be searched. His men dragged stones, dug at the ground, forced open old towers, but the shelter beneath remained hidden, its entrance concealed by the craft Mira had returned to rest. And so the soldiers found nothing, their frustration growing with each passing day. Mira kept to the shadows, slipping between huts, taking food only when no one watched. Returning always to the shelter, her heart beat heavy with fear, but inside she also felt a new strength. She had flown once and survived. She had seen the sky as her father had promised. She knew now that she carried his gift, yet she also knew that her flight had revealed too much. The general would not stop until she stood before him. At night she sat inside the cockpit, tracing the controls with her fingers, whispering to herself the steps her father had taught. Start the engine, listen to its hum, pull the lever with care, feel the wings lift, trust the air. She practiced without leaving the ground, telling herself she must learn more. For the first flight had been clumsy, and if she faced the general again, she could not rely on luck alone. Days passed. Tension grew. The general began questioning the villagers with greater force. His soldiers lined the people in the square, demanding names, demanding secrets. But the villagers had none to give. Though many now guessed the truth, they had seen Mira slip away often. They had noticed her silence. Some whispered to each other that she was the daughter of the old pilot, yet none dared speak it aloud. For fear of the general's wrath and for a deeper reason still, part of them believed Mira carried hope, and they could not betray that hope. One evening Mira sat by the stream, the moonlight shining across the water. She washed her hands and tried to steady her thoughts. She remembered her father's last days, the way he had struggled to breathe, the way he had held her hand and spoken of skies and courage. She asked herself if he had known it would come to this, if he had prepared her not for stories but for destiny. Her heart whispered yes, he had known, and that was why he had left her the shelter and the craft. The next morning the general made a new command. He told the villagers that if the last pilot did not reveal themselves within 3 days, he would burn the valley to the ground. His words struck like thunder. Mothers wept. Fathers clenched their fists. Children cried. The air was thick with despair. Mira heard the cries and felt fire rise in her chest. She could no longer wait. She could no longer hide. The time to act had come. That night she returned to the cockpit, this time not to practice but to prepare. She checked the wings, the gears, the fuel. She whispered to the machine as if it were alive, promising that they would face the storm together. She touched the seat where her father had once sat and felt his spirit beside her. She was no longer a girl running from her past. She was a pilot, and the sky was calling. When the second night came, Mira rose into the air once more, her flight smoother than before, the machine answering her touch with grace. She soared across the valley, the stars guiding her. She did not strike the soldiers. She did not rain destruction. Instead, she drew their eyes. She showed them that the skies belonged not to fear, but to freedom. Villagers stepped from their huts and gazed upward with wonder, their hearts lifting as they saw her. For a moment, hope returned to them, fragile yet bright. The general watched as she passed overhead, his teeth clenched, his hands curling behind his back. He ordered his soldiers to fire again. But Mira moved quicker this time, dodging the bursts of flame, weaving through the night air like a shadow. She was learning, she was growing, and the general saw it, his anger rising, yet also a spark of something else. Respect mixed with hatred. He realized she was more than chance. She was truly the last pilot standing. After the flight, Mira returned to the shelter, sweat dripping from her brow, arms aching, but her spirit stronger. She whispered to herself that she could no longer flee. The general would not leave. The valley would not be free unless she faced him fully. The thought filled her with dread, yet it also filled her with resolve. She had taken her first steps, and there was no path back to silence. The third day dawned with heavy clouds. The general gathered the villagers once more. He raised his voice and declared that time was over. He would burn the valley that very night. The villagers trembled. Some fell to their knees. But before fear consumed them, a sound broke across the sky, the roar of an engine awakening once again. Mira flew low over the square, the wings cutting through the mist. The engine thundering, the villagers gasped. Soldiers stumbled back. The general looked upward with eyes that blazed. Mira tilted the craft and released a flare, a burst of light that filled the sky. She did not attack. She only showed herself, clear and unafraid, a message to the general that she would not hide any longer. The villagers cheered softly, their hearts trembling between fear and pride. They saw the girl they had once thought quiet and distant now above them like a guardian of the sky. The general, however, felt no cheer. His jaw tightened, his heart hardened. He raised his hand and swore that he would capture her with his own command. He would break the last pilot and crush the hope she carried. Mira returned once more to the shelter. Landing rough but steady, she sat in the cockpit, breathing hard. Staring into the darkness, she knew what was coming. The general would not wait, he would strike. and when he did, she must be ready. She whispered to herself again and again that she was not alone, that her father's spirit was with her, that the sky itself carried her wings. The fear within her remained, but courage now stood beside it, and she knew her path was set. The valley held its breath as night fell. The soldiers gathered. The general sharpened his command, and in the shelter Mira prepared for what was to come. She had stayed hidden for years, but now there was no more hiding. She was the last pilot standing, and the storm had only begun. The night carried a heavy silence across the valley. Torches burned in the square. Soldiers stood ready, their armor gleaming faintly under the pale light of the moon. General Aaron paced slowly, his eyes sharp, his voice low yet cutting. "Tonight we end this. Tonight the last pilot falls." His words spread among his men like iron, filling them with both fear and duty. Mira sat within the shelter, her craft before her, her hands trembling yet her spirit strong. She had flown twice and survived. But she knew that the next fight would not be a simple flight across the valley. The general was preparing to strike, his men were ready, and he would not rest until she was captured or destroyed. Mira touched the cold metal of her father's craft and whispered, "Tonight the sky will test me, tonight I must stand." She checked the wings once more, smoothed the worn controls, tightened the straps, her movements slow but steady. Every sound of the soldiers above reached her ears. She could feel their presence closing in. The weight of destiny pressed upon her, yet she also felt her father's voice in memory guiding her, telling her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to rise despite it. The villagers gathered at the edges of the square, drawn by both fear and hope. They had seen Mira in the sky. They had felt their hearts lift, and though none spoke her name aloud, they whispered to each other that she would come again, that she would not let the valley fall. Some prayed softly, some held their children close, some simply stared at the airfield, waiting for the sound that would break the silence. As the general gave his orders, the soldiers began to march toward the airfield. Their boots thundered against the earth. Their torches cast long shadows. They carried heavy weapons, their eyes sharp. They believed they would find the hidden pilot and end it tonight. The general followed, his steps measured, his mind fixed. He had hunted many enemies, but none had stirred his focus as much as this girl who flew like a shadow. He wanted to see her fall with his own eyes. Mira heard the echoes of boots above the shelter. The ground shook slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling. She gripped the controls and drew a deep breath. She could not wait for them to break the door. She had to rise before they reached her. She pressed the ignition and the chamber roared with life. Engines thundered, the air shook. The hidden passage opened slowly, light spilling in, and the sleeping giant awoke. The soldiers stumbled back as the roar filled the air. Some shouted, some raised their weapons, but before they could act, the craft surged forward. Breaking into the open, Mira's heart pounded as she pulled the lever. The wings stretched wide, the wheels left the ground, and she was once again in the sky, rising above the valley, fire and smoke trailing behind her. The villagers gasped, their eyes wide with awe. Some cried out in joy, some in fear, but all watched as the machine soared above, a living reminder that the spirit of the skies had not been broken. Children pointed upward with shining eyes. Elders bowed their heads in reverence, and hope sparked like flame in the darkness. General Aaron stood tall, his gaze fixed upon her, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. He ordered his soldiers to bring out the heavy guns, weapons that had slept in wagons until now. They were wheeled into place, their barrels rising to meet the sky, and the general's voice rang out like thunder. Fire explosions tore through the air as the weapons roared. Mira swerved sharply, the craft groaning, heat and smoke flashing past her. Her heart raced, sweat burned her brow. She tightened her grip and pulled the wings into a dive. The wind howled against her. Villagers screamed as the night sky lit with flame, but Mira held steady, guiding the craft like her father had once shown her, trusting her instincts, trusting the machine. She soared upward again, dodging bursts of fire weaving through the clouds, each movement smoother than before, each decision sharper. She was learning in the heat of the storm. Her fear still heavy, but her courage greater. She was no longer only the daughter of a pilot. She was becoming a pilot herself, one born in the fire of struggle. General Aaron watched her dance through the sky, his fury growing, yet beneath it a grudging respect formed. She was not only brave, but skilled. Far more skilled than he had expected. He clenched his fist and muttered that she would not escape him. Not tonight, not ever. He raised his hand again, shouting for the soldiers to keep firing, to bring her down no matter the cost. The valley shook with the sound of battle. Fire flashed across the heavens. Smoke curled above the mountains. Mira's craft spun and dived, engines roaring, wings gleaming faintly under the moon. Villagers clung to each other as they watched, their fear mixing with wonder. For even as destruction reigned, they saw in Mira's flight something more than war. They saw defiance, they saw hope. Mira felt her arms ache, her chest burn, her eyes blur, yet she pushed forward, her mind clear, her heart steady. She whispered to herself that she would not fall, that she could not fall, not while the valley depended on her, not while her father's memory guided her. She pulled the craft higher, breaking through the smoke, soaring into the open sky, stars surrounding her like guardians. Her spirit lifted even in the storm. For hours the struggle continued, Mira weaving and dodging, soldiers firing, the general commanding with unyielding will, yet still she remained, battered but unbroken, a lone figure against the might of an army. As dawn's first light touched the mountains, the guns grew silent. Smoke drifted lazily through the air. The general lowered his hand, his eyes narrowed, his voice calm yet cold. Enough. She has shown her strength. But this is not the end. This is only the beginning. Mira guided the craft back to the hidden shelter, landing rough, the machine groaning, her body trembling with exhaustion. She stumbled out and leaned against the wing, tears streaming down her face, not of fear but of release. She had faced the storm and survived. She whispered to the silent chamber that she was ready, that she would not run again, that she would stand as her father once stood. In the valley the people gathered quietly, speaking of what they had seen. Some still feared the general's wrath, but others now spoke with pride. They called her the light of the sky, the guardian of the valley. Hope returned to their voices, and though the general still walked among them, his presence heavy, their spirits were no longer fully chained. They had seen a girl rise against his power and live. General Aaron returned to his camp. His face calm, yet his mind burning, he sat alone and stared at the map of the land. His hand resting on the table, his thoughts deep. He whispered to himself that he would capture her, that he would bend her or break her, for she was more than a pilot now. She was a symbol. And symbols were more dangerous than weapons. Mira lay upon the ground beside the craft, her body weak, her spirit strong. The dawn light falling across her face, she knew the general would not leave. She knew he would come again stronger. Yet she also knew that she was ready. Her fear remained, but her courage had grown. The valley looked to her now, and she could not turn away. She had stepped into the sky, and there was no path back to the shadows as the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the valley. Mira closed her eyes and whispered one last promise. I will not hide again, I will fly, I will stand, for I am the last pilot. The sun climbed higher above the valley. Golden light touched the mountains, the rivers, and the fields, yet the hearts of the people remained restless. For though Mira had risen against the storm of fire and lived, the shadow of the general still lay heavy upon them. His army had not left. His eyes still searched the skies, and all knew that another battle would come. Mira sat near her craft, her body weary but her spirit unbroken. She could feel the weight of every glance from the villagers. Their whispers carried both fear and hope. They looked to her now as the last pilot, the one who stood between them and the chains of the general. She wished for rest, but rest would not come. Her journey was not yet finished. Her promise to the valley and to her father's memory burned within her like flame. General Aaron did not sleep that night nor the next. He walked through his camp, he studied the sky. He traced the maps again and again. He knew that Mira's flight had stirred something dangerous, not only in the valley but in his own ranks. Some soldiers had spoken of her with wonder, some with respect. He had silenced them quickly, yet he knew that whispers could not be killed with commands. Symbols were harder to destroy than people, and Mira had become one. He called his captains and spoke with a voice cold as stone. We will not wait. We will strike with all our power. The valley must kneel, the pilot must fall. His words carried across the camp. Drums were struck, weapons were prepared. Engines of war were pulled to the edge of the fields. The ground trembled with the weight of the general's will. The final storm was ready. That night, Mira sat upon the wing of her craft and gazed at the stars, her hands folded, her eyes bright. She whispered softly, Father, if you can hear me, guide me now, the valley needs me. I am afraid, but I will not run. I will rise once more. Her voice faded into the wind, but her heart grew steadier. The fear still remained, yet courage grew stronger, and courage was enough. The villagers gathered around her, some bringing water, some bringing cloth, some only bringing their voices of comfort. One elder spoke gently. Child, the sky has chosen you. We cannot fly as you can, but we can stand with you. Remember that you are not alone. Mira's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. She felt their strength join her own. Their faith became her shield. As dawn approached, the valley shook. The army of the general marched forward, their banners dark against the rising sun. Their weapons gleamed, their drums thundered. The air itself seemed to tremble. The villagers watched from their doorways, fear tightening their chests. Yet their eyes lifted again to Mira, waiting for the sound that had once broken silence and brought hope. Mira stepped into the craft, her hands steady upon the controls. The chamber roared with life. Fire and smoke burst forth. The machine shuddered as if waking from deep sleep. The hidden doors opened wide, light spilled in, and Mira whispered to herself, "For the valley, for freedom, for the sky." Then the craft surged forward, wheels racing, wings spreading, and once more she rose into the heavens. Her figure framed against the morning light. Gasps rose from the village. Cries of wonder and courage filled the air. Children cheered. Elders lifted their arms. Hope spread like fire. Mira's craft soared above them. Her shadow cast across the fields, her voice silent but her message clear. She would not let the valley fall. General Aaron stood at the front of his army, his eyes never leaving her, his jaw tight, his hands behind his back. He whispered, "This ends today." And with a sharp gesture he gave the command. Weapons lifted, the sky roared with fire. The battle began, explosions lit the morning. Smoke curled upward. Mira weaved through the storm, her craft groaning, the wind tearing at her hair. Her arms ached, yet her focus sharpened. She guided the wings with precision, diving, climbing, spinning through the storm, every breath a battle, every heartbeat a choice to keep rising. The villagers cried out as fire streaked the sky, yet they did not flee. They watched. They prayed. They held to each other, for they knew that their fate hung upon the flight of one girl, one pilot, the last pilot, and they would not turn away. General Aaron narrowed his eyes as she evaded again and again. His soldiers fired, but she slipped through their grasp like wind. His fury burned, yet his mind was calm. He raised his hand and ordered the great cannons forward, massive machines of iron that had waited in the rear. Their barrels lifted, their shadows fell across the valley, and their thunder shook the ground as they fired into the heavens. The blast tore through the clouds. Mira's craft shook violently. Flames licked the wings, smoke rose from the engine. She gasped, gripping the controls. Fighting to keep steady, the ground rushed closer. Yet she pulled with all her strength. The craft rose again, battered but not broken, her eyes fierce. Her spirit burning brighter, she whispered, "Not yet, not yet." The villagers cried out in fear, then in relief as she rose again. They clapped their hands, their voices rose. Hope surged stronger, their faith in her unshaken. They called her name now, no longer in whispers but in shouts, "Mira, Mira, Mira." The sound carried across the valley, reaching even the ears of the general. Aaron's face hardened. His jaw clenched. He heard their voices and knew that she had already won part of the battle. She had given the people courage, and courage was more dangerous than fire. He could not allow it. He ordered every weapon to focus on her, to crush her once and for all. The sky became a storm of flame and smoke. Yet Mira did not falter. She soared higher, she dived lower. She turned the storm against itself, guiding the fire away. Her mind clear, her heart blazing, she thought of her father, of his hands upon these same controls, of his voice telling her to trust the sky. She thought of the villagers, of their children, of their faith, and she thought of herself, no longer hidden, no longer afraid, but standing, truly standing. Hours passed. The battle raged, the army grew weary. Weapons overheated, soldiers faltered, yet Mira still flew, still burned across the sky like a comet, her endurance beyond reason, her spirit unyielding. The people watched with tears in their eyes, with pride in their hearts. They saw not only a girl, but a symbol of freedom. Finally, the general raised his hand. Silence spread slowly. The guns lowered, the soldiers stilled. The valley filled with smoke and the cries of the wounded. Mira circled above, her wings cracked, her engine coughing, yet she still flew. She descended slowly, guiding the machine to the field, landing rough but alive, dust rising around her. Silence followed. She stepped out, her clothes torn, her face marked with ash, but her eyes bright. Her chest lifted, she stood before the people, before the soldiers, before the general. She raised her head high, her voice clear though soft. "I am Mira. I am the last pilot, and I will not bow." The villagers cheered. Their voices thundered. The sound filled the valley. Children laughed and clapped. Elders wept openly. Men and women embraced, their fear broken, their courage set free. Mira's name carried like song. Echoing into the mountains, General Aaron stood still, his eyes fixed on her. For the first time he felt a weight within his chest, not fear but something close to respect. He knew that she had done what few could do. She had faced his power and lived. She had lifted the hearts of her people, and though his pride would not allow him to bow, his silence spoke enough. He turned slowly, his soldiers followed. The army moved back, their drums silent, their banners lowered. Mira watched as they withdrew, her knees trembling, her heart pounding, yet she remained standing. She looked at the villagers, at their shining eyes, at their raised hands, and she smiled through tears. She had not only flown, she had given them back their courage, and that was greater than any victory in the sky. That night the valley was alive with light. Fires burned in joy, not in fear. Songs rose, children danced. The people spoke her name proudly. Mira the last pilot, Mira the guardian of the valley, Mira who rose when none else could. They brought food. They brought gifts. Yet Mira asked only for rest and for silence. She wished to sit once more upon the wing of her craft and gaze at the stars. She whispered softly, "Father, I kept the promise. I did not hide. I stood. And I will keep standing. The sky is mine now. And it belongs to the valley too." Her eyes closed, her heart at peace. She had faced the storm and remained not broken, but shining. And so the story of Mira spread beyond the valley. Carried by travelers, carried by whispers, carried by song, she became more than a girl. She became a legend, the last pilot who stood against an army, who turned fear into courage, who gave light to a people in darkness. And though the days moved forward, though storms came and passed, her name remained, her flight remembered. Her spirit living in every child who looked up at the sky and dreamed of rising Mira, the last pilot standing.